Fear is causing corporations to abandon the LGBTQ plus community. Unbelievable. Hi, my name is Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and it is time for another breakdown. I'm here on Legal AF. Make sure to subscribe to keep up to date on all the foolishness coming out of this current presidential administration. So it's June, it's Pride Month. And this is the time when corporations would join with the LGBTQ community in sponsoring various pride events around the country and around the world. This is a time for corporations to show that they actually value the LGBTQ plus community as well as their dollars. But as a result of this administration's steadfast hate of the LGBTQ plus community, all these corporations are ducking and covering, which is pathetic. And it also speaks to the fact that realistically, a lot of these corporations really didn't care about this community, much like we saw in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and all of these corporations posting black boxes on their social media and being like, oh, yes, we're allies and this and that. And then the minute, give it a couple years and suddenly all the promises, all the pledges of donations and money and supporting different causes related to the, Black and brown community, that all vanished, right? The minute the president and his cronies came out and said, oh, we're anti-DEI, in 2 seconds, DEI efforts were just thrown in the trash. Well, the same thing is now happening to the LGBTQ plus community. So companies like MasterCard, Deloitte, Pepsi have pulled hundreds of thousands of dollars in pride sponsorships for different festivals after the president declared DEI illegal and immoral. All right. So when you're just looking at the amount of damage that this has done, nearly a quarter of corporate donors to the New York City Pride Parade, which includes MasterCard, Citi, Pepsi, Nissan, PwC, pulled sponsorships totaling an estimated $750,000. Now, remember, these Pride parades and festivals and all that, they're not free. Okay. Now, I'll talk about the original Pride in a minute, but what this Pride has really come into is not only just a celebration of the LGBTQ plus community and of course celebrating not only them, but with their allies, but it was an opportunity for corporations to show that they are welcoming, that not only are they supportive of their LGBTQ plus employees, but they're also supportive of their the folks that purchase their goods, their consumers that are LGBTQ plus, right? So that presence showed allyship and showed in some ways respect for the community. So you saw what happened. I just mentioned what happened with New York City Pride. World Pride, which is happening in Washington, D.C., consulting giants like Booz Allen Hamilton and Deloitte dropped their sponsorships, and then that resulted in a loss of nearly $260,000 in funding. Anheuser-Busch, which is the parent company to Bud and Bud Light, withdrew their sponsorship from Pride events in San Fran and Columbus and in St. Louis, where the company's actually headquartered. And that, of course, again, really had a horrible effect on those parades as well. Now, the whole thing that caused these companies to kind of start to duck and cover is the executive order that the president signed on his first day of office, declaring DEI initiatives illegal and immoral discrimination, and announced the termination of federal offices and grants related to DEI training. Then he drafted a second order and signed a second order saying that he was ending federal funding of quote unquote gender ideology, which, as we all know, is a right-wing term that describes the existence of and refers to the existence of transgender people and their rights. So as a result of all of this, all of these corporations are terrified that the president and his administration would then train their eyes on their company. And then again, the fear of losing federal contracts, the fear of, somehow being investigated, the fear of backlash, the fear caused them to duck and cover. So let's be clear. In the last few years, more like the last decade, corporate America jumped on the bandwagon in terms of supporting pride events, especially after the Supreme Court had ruled that same-sex marriage was legal in this country as of 2015. So, of course, every June, Target, everybody, they got the pride-themed merchandise and, they're like, we're allies. They, change up the credit card so that it, is more pride-themed, and they would have a float at various pride events. Now, I'm a proud ally to the LGBTQ plus community. I live in what I call a rainbow neighborhood, right? I live in a predominantly LGBTQ plus neighborhood. I've gone to many a pride event, and it's a huge thing. Like, you'll see, a huge float from American Airlines. Pepsi is giving out free sodas or having different booths so people can stop by, and a lot of companies and corporations also use this as another way to boost their visibility. They would, use that as a way to talk to folks, and, whether it's a life insurance or whatever it is, you try to get more people in the fold. So that brand visibility became a very important staple in their corporate year and in their corporate budget. And so, but the flip side is the original Pride was a riot, basically. The original Pride was a revolution. And so a lot of the old heads from, and I say this with affection, of course, old heads from the movement were like, no, this is just some corporate BS. This is getting away from what the spirit of Pride is about. Because again, folks looked at this as what they called rainbow capitalism, because I think it really did ring hollow to a lot of different LGBTQ plus activists, et cetera, to be like, you don't really care about us all year long, but in June, you're going to show up and be like, hey, yeah, we're supportive. Much like, Black History Month, sometimes, these corporations show up and they're like, yay, Black Lives Matter. And then the rest of the year, they could give a hoot, right? So I think there was that kind of negative rub that was already brewing, but it didn't mean that they didn't want the money, right? In terms of being able to put on these fabulous events that, number one, are free to the community, that offer, you're out in the heat in June, there's water stands, there's, there's food available, there's different events that are all tied to Pride Month. And of course, the underlying thing, which is the celebration of the LGBTQ plus community, their existence, the fact that they're, able to get married, to love who they want to love, to live freely. While, of course, we're not 100% there yet, we're in a much better place now than we were in the past. So that evolution is part of the celebration of Pride. So, and then the other thing, which is tied to the whole rainbow capitalism thing, is that while some of these companies are like, yay, Pride in June, they're donating all the rest of the year to anti-gay politicians, they probably donated to this president's campaign, that sort of thing, donating to causes that are anti the LGBTQ plus community. So, it's that dichotomy of like, well, who are you really? Well, now we know who they really are, because the minute the going gets tough, they're gone. They didn't really have true, genuine support of the LGBTQ community. It was performative. So just to kind of go back a little bit in history, the first Pride Parade was held in 1970 in New York City. And that was 1 year after trans and queer people spent several days protesting police harassment outside of the Stonewall Inn. And that's what later became known as the Stonewall Uprising. Now, the Stonewall Uprising was led by marginalized, Black and brown queer folks who were at the front lines being like, listen, we're tired of being targeted by the police. We're tired of not being able to be who we are. All we want to do is go have a drink and be left alone, right? Just like anybody else in this country, you just want to live your life and be left alone. And that was not an opportunity they were able to enjoy. So that is the origins of Pride. So I could see how activists got like kind of annoyed over the space of time, where you're kind of getting away from that elemental. It was about organizing. It was about, standing up for your rights, and it more becoming a party. Now, again, we're in a different place. We still have struggles as, as allies, as a community to get to complete parity. But again, arguably, 2025 is much better than 1970. While it's not where we need it to be, it's still better. But now we're starting again to see that rollback. So I think Pride is going to have to go back to that elemental grassroots organizing, fighting spirit, because these corporations are showing that they're really not all about that life. We're now facing unprecedented threats coming from this administration. As Dina and I did a video about this earlier this week, talking about how the ship, the naval ship that was named after Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected official in this country, that Pete Hegseth and the DOD are basically going to strip his name from that ship and rename it to something else. And again, Harvey Milk was a trailblazer. He, again, did something that was unprecedented at the time. He showed that, which is what is now the norm, to see a gay person or an LGBTQ plus person in office. It's not as shocking or as rare anymore. He was the first one. And so to see this level of hatred and just disgustingness, I know it's not a word, whatever, but disgustingness coming from this administration and these corporations being like, okay, tickle my belly. Listen, if you're going to boycott the community, then we need to boycott you. Target learned about that the hard way because they were the first ones to buckle under pressure. I believe that was last year or the year before when right-wing activists started to target them because they were like, haha, target. Anyway, that because of the fact that Target would have Pride merchandise every June, suddenly now the right-wingers wanted to boycott Target. And so they kind of started to back away from selling Pride merchandise. On top of that, they, of course, were anti-DEI and backed away from their promises to the Black community. So an amazing pastor went ahead and started a boycott, and basically it started as a boycott over Lent. So it was going to be a Lenten fast, and we were going to fast from shopping at Target. And when Target basically was like, all right, well, we're not going to change our stances, despite them seeing a humongous drop in foot traffic, as well as a huge drop in their revenues, they still held the anti-DEI line. And so Pastor was like, Pastor Jamal Bryant. Pastor was like, you know what? We're going to keep this boycott going. And guess what? It's still going, and their profits are still plummeting. I think it's time for the LGBTQ plus community to do something similar. And I think that all marginalized communities should come together and start boycotting these companies in earnest that are not supportive of our existence, of our rights, and will just kowtow to the government. Because again, keep in mind, these are multi-billion-dollar corporations. They can withstand a fight with the president. Now, slightly different context, but similar, look at Harvard, right? You had Columbia University and all these other universities. Okay, roll over, tickle my belly. I'm sorry. The minute that the president started to target them, and Harvard 10 toes down. Why? Because they have a multi-million-dollar endowment that they can ride out and still be able to keep the lights on at Harvard until this administration is out of office. So these corporations have the financial wherewithal to make it. And if they actually stood up, they would probably see increased revenue, increased sales. But with them, acting in a spineless manner, well, play stupid games, get stupid prizes. So, I could go on in terms of other companies. Actually, yeah, I want to keep naming these companies. So 5 companies, Google, Home Depot, Nissan, Adidas, and Clorox, pulled their financial support from Pride Toronto, which is Canada's largest Pride festival. So again, they showed who they are. And of course, I mentioned Target and their issues. So, again, I think about all of these smaller towns. I'm not even thinking about New York, Miami, where we are and all of that, because maybe fine, the corporations pull out, but you may have, wealthy members of the community or other mid-level businesses or whatever that can kind of step in the gap or donate, hey, okay, I can't donate money, but I can donate a few cases of water or whatever the case may be, or I can have some of my people help staff some of the booths or help out or whatever the case may be. I'm thinking about the small communities, small towns. Like, for instance, this one came out of the Huffington Post, a person by the name of Stevie Miller, who helped set up the first Pride event in West Plains, which is in southern Missouri. And on a shoestring budget, him and his crew were able to host 900 people. And then they've turned this festival into a nonprofit organization that did educational programming and community events throughout the year. And so, for this coming year, they're like, okay, let's up our game. Let's start talking to corporate sponsors and see what we can make happen. And now they're finding that as a result of the hostility coming from the White House, they were no longer able to get corporate sponsors to be able to put on an event of the magnitude they really wanted to do. So now, in a way, they're back to the drawing board, and they're feeling hurt and betrayed by some of the local businesses who just, again, basically ducked and covered. So I think it's on all of us, number one, to stand in the gap and donate to Pride events in our backyards. That's one way to be able to offset this. Number two is to continue to speak out, educate friends and family, and also, again, call out homophobia where you see it, whether it's at your Thanksgiving table, at your, whatever, the summer cookout, whatever the case may be. We all have our responsibility to support marginalized communities. And it doesn't always have to be this big thing where you on socials talking about whatever. It could be a one-on-one when somebody says something like, oh yeah, transgender people are all predators and this and that. And it's like, actually, no, a predator is a predator. That's something completely different than somebody who, has a different gender identity. Like, you don't have to switch gender identities if you're a pedophile. You can do that perfectly fine who you are, right? So kind of beating back some of these myths and horrible things that are being said. And you do that if we all do that one person at a time, I think we will see a completely different society. Well, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this was The Breakdown. Make sure to subscribe to Legal AF. Take care. Bye-bye.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.